Hi, and welcome to this section of the Pre-Algebra Tutor. And in this section, we're going to move away from addition and subtraction of integers, which is what we've done in the last couple of sections. And in this section, we're going to conquer multiplication of integers, which I think all of you can agree is very, very important. And so you need to really understand how to do this really well and effortlessly. And the good news is that multiplication and division that we'll get to in the next section is actually much easier than learning how to add and subtract integers. In fact, I could have put multiplication and division first, ultimately decided not to. So, in multiplication, you know how to multiply your numbers. The only thing that we're going to be doing in this section is trying to figure out what sign, negative or positive, to put in your answer. And so that's going to depend on the numbers that you're multiplying together. There's a few simple little rules to remember, and I promise you that if you don't already know them, then you'll definitely know them once we're done working on problems, because it'll be something that you'll just remember because we work so many problems and you'll have to use the rules over and over again. So remember back to addition and subtraction of integers. Briefly, basically you add them or subtract them, and you have to look at the absolute value of the numbers that you have in order to figure out what the sign of the answer is. And you have to do a little bit of thinking, because you have to look at, in your head, at least in the beginning, you have to think of where on the number line you are. Are you adding? Are you subtracting? And so are you going left or right? Is your number going to get bigger or smaller? You have to do some thinking, and it all depends on the relative sizes of those two numbers. So you really have to think about the number line and figure out where your numbers are in order to add and subtract them. In multiplication and division of integers, you really don't have to worry about the absolute value at all, which makes it easier. You just have to think about the signs of the numbers. And there's a few simple rules, and so it'll be very, very simple. So let's go ahead and outline these rules of integer multiplication. But before we do that, there are a few different ways to write multiplication. I remember back when I first took pre-algebra and algebra, and I remember that coming from a world of just learning how to, basic math, adding, subtracting, dividing, things like that, and opening up a pre-algebra book, I was very intimidated, very, worried, I guess I should say, about all the parentheses in the book, in the pre-algebra book. The multiplication looked different. Everything looked a little bit different. And so what I'm going to do here is just show you a few different ways that you're probably going to see things multiplied together in your book. But just remember, don't be worried about it. It's all multiplication. It's stuff that you've been doing for many, many years. It's just written a little bit different, because when we get into bigger and bigger, calculations, it's going to help us to write it in this way. So there's a couple different ways that you've probably seen in your book to write multiplication. The first way is the way that you've been doing all your life. So 2 times 4 will equal 8. 2 times 4 is 8. This little x here means multiplication, right? Well, it turns out that you're not going to use this way very much. I'm just putting it on the board just so for completeness here. So I'm going to say not used much. The reason why we don't use this very much when we start to work in algebra and pre-algebra is because of this x here. Because later on we're going to start using letters to represent numbers. And so here when I write this, I don't know if this is 2 times 4 is 8, or if this is 2x4, x being a variable. So you'll understand a little bit later when we get into equations and variables why this would get confusing. But we really never use letters unless we're really talking about a variable or something in algebra. So we're not gonna write multiplication that way. That would just be confusing. Another way that you would write it, which is very common, is 2 times 4 is equal to 8. And here's a little dot between the 2 and the 4. You see this pretty often, and it's just the same thing. Don't be worried about it. When you first look at it, you think, oh, what's this dot here? It's something new. Well, it's just multiplication, nothing new. All right, another way that you would see it is with parentheses. 2 times 4 is equal to 4 times 2 is equal to 8. So anytime you have something inside of parentheses and another set of parentheses, then whatever's inside the parentheses are just multiplied together. See, there's no multiplication symbol between there. There's no addition symbol. There's nothing between there. So when two things in pre-algebra are just sitting next to each other, you always assume that they're multiplied together. That's the bottom line. And so that's very, very common. You're going to see this the most with the parentheses and things just sitting together. And so just sort of an aside is like if you had, 2 times the variable a. We've talked about letters already a little bit in this class and how they can represent numbers. If you just put it right next to the letter, that's exactly the same thing as 2 times a. These are just 2 different ways to write the same thing. 2 times a, 2 times a, same thing. If there's nothing between them, they're multiplied together. If you see a dot between them, they're also multiplied together. So nothing special. I just wanted to point that out so that when you're looking in your book, you won't be worried about it.